Hello, welcome to Broadcast Show Live from BVE North here in sunny Manchester. My name is Will Strauss. I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes or so as we discuss the subject of local TV, a topic of significant interest to many people both in this room and around the country. Now, local TV in the UK has a long and difficult history. Over the years, there have been many attempts to provide a truly local televisual experience, but despite good intentions, nearly all have succumbed to a lack of funding. That could be all about to change. Earlier this year, the government started accepting bids for city-based local TV stations, and now, through industry regulator Ofcom, is awarding licences to run them. These licences will see local news and current affairs programming broadcast to 21 British cities via an independent multiplex operator on a dedicated channel on Freeview. £25 million worth of the BBC's licence fee has been put aside to pay for the local TV infrastructure, with a further £15 million being made available for content. Designed to sit alongside rather than replace current regional television services, the overarching plan is that local TV will offer a new voice for local communities, with local perspectives that are directly relevant to them. The response has been good so far. Last time I looked, 57 bids were received for licences, with the first 2 awarded in Brighton and Grimsby. Right now, roughly 10 of the 21 city licences have been awarded, which all sounds hugely promising. Yet, despite the public funding and the thirst for local TV, some observers predict that it will once again prove to be a commercial disaster because too few advertisers will buy time with such small potential audiences. To discuss this issue and further other issues related to it, I have with me 4 guests in fact today. Canis Media's Clare, Bramley and Ed Hall, Debra Davis of City TV, which recently won the local TV licence for Birmingham, and City Broadcasting's Phillip Reevell, who's one of the key figures behind Carlisle TV and is also bidding for licences around the country. Debra, if I could start with you. As someone that's won a licence, if I can come to you, Roy Greenslade in The Guardian describes the whole local TV project as highly optimistic. There's certainly an element of risk involved in it, so why are you doing it?
I come from a very different perspective. I grew up in Montreal, which as an Anglophone, so I was English in a French province next door to the United States. If we didn't have local television, we would have just been sort of overwhelmed with either French programming or American programming. And even by the time I was 10 years old, I understood the value of local identity and what could help local audiences and what was going on in our city. I think this is an important commercial opportunity. In the larger cities, it is absolutely a business and we have to run it affordably. But I also think that this is an opportunity to make the greatest contribution to public service in helping to shape opinion, behaviors, perceptions, attitudes. So I think it's a great contributor, but it will be affordable and commercial. Which
is very important, but we've heard some of these things before, and we've had attempts at local TV before. Philip, perhaps I could ask you, as someone who's both had experience of local television and he's also bidding this time, what's going to be different this time around?
Well, the regulatory framework is much more encouraging this time. I mean, you mentioned Carlisle, but actually my first experience with local TV was here in Manchester with Channel M, which I set up in 1998, it's a long time ago. They were analogue licenses, the frequency was not very good, you didn't really get an audience, and so it proved very difficult. Tried to do similar ones in Middlesbrough and in Carlisle, but on analogue frequencies, simply couldn't get any support or any traction. The government changed the plans for this round by putting BBC funding to subsidise the transmission, and also, crucially, to subsidise the first year of news provision by local channels. So here in Manchester, the application I've put in is called Manchester News Channel, which will take full benefit from the BBC subsidy and just focus on providing news, and of trying to avoid, therefore, the pitfalls that Channel M ran into, which was that they were very, very ambitious, had a huge staff, huge program commitments, but were unable to generate the kind of ad revenues that were needed to sustain it. So the regulatory framework's better. The economic climate, I'm not sure that it is. The production framework, in terms of the cost of production, cost of entry, is much better now. You can start a TV channel and run one at a lower cost. So there's sort of pros and cons, but that's one of the reasons why people think the jury's out, and Ofcom are going through this process of awarding licenses.
Interesting. Let's think about the content that might appear on some of these channels. Clare, you've been involved in several bids as a consultant, backing your own. Can you give us an idea of the kind of things that people are suggesting, and also the things that you think might work best?
Okay, first of all, those organisations that we've consulted for all fall into a very specific genre. You probably know that there have been a number of organisations bidding for multiple cities. They have some very prescriptive ideas about the sort of content that they will be showing, and they will be sharing content across the areas in which they're licensed. I've been working with Debra and her team specifically, and other companies like that, because they are single city bidders. Those single city bidders tend to have very strong local links with the hyper-local news gatherers, and I think that the local licensees will actually be a great aggregator of hyper-local news. Now, also, some of the organisations have very specific existing businesses, such as Leeds TV, who clearly are very involved in football. Their content will be very centric on the work that they're doing through their foundation and with the local communities. There really is no single answer to your question. Every single region spoke content, with news generally at the heart of it.
Is there a case in point to say that it could be spread out beyond news? I mean, Debra, you've expressed an opinion on this.
I think this is one of our local strengths, is because we've been working very closely with the independent production sector in Birmingham, and I think they have a lot that they can contribute. I mean, they're already doing either the corporate videos or videos for public service, or a lot of them are actually have been commissioned for mainstream channels, Channel 5, Channel 4, whatever, ITV. So I would like to be able to work with them very closely and do more things around either entertainment or lifestyle, magazine shows, certainly sports when it comes to little leagues, you know, the junior football leagues, the junior cricket. So I think there's a lot of things about what's on. So certainly the news and current affairs provision is absolutely paramount. I think that's just absolutely key and fundamental to any programming commitments we make to Ofcom. But I think there's an opportunity to make affordable programming that is creative, entertaining, local, and if it's not about your city, perhaps it's made in your city, that has a wider remit.
You mentioned the word affordable. I think it seems to be very key. Let's talk about some business models if we can. I'm particularly interested to hear what Debra and Phillip have to say on this. Maybe we'll start with Debra, as you're a winner. How are you going to plan? How do you plan to fund this content?
A lot of it, I think the startup cost in the first 18 months, 24 months is going to have to rely on investment, so equity investment and financial arrangements, which are in place. But we have a very, I think, ambitious marketing strategy, sales strategy to attract people that advertise locally, people that have never advertised at all, but to do it in a way that we can show value. We're going to have to be very, very creative to develop the right kind of campaigns. And I think there's a lot of people that spend a lot of money on communications. And in my former life, I was a director of communications at Birmingham City Council, for instance, so I know very well what local authorities need to spend in order to communicate with residents. And I just think there's a better way of actually getting those messages across that people will hear and will resonate with viewers. So I think that's really important. So I think there's a lot of public, private sector initiatives, and I think certainly it is based on advertising, sponsorship, and a few other revenue streams that we'll announce when we announce them.
That's interesting. There's a £5 million a year figure I keep reading about, which the BBC is putting aside for content. Now, Phillip, you've mentioned news being a core focus of your views on local TV. There is an argument to say that you wouldn't want to sell your content to the BBC because they're a competitor. Equally, will the BBC have time to air all this local TV content? What's your take on all of this?
Well, I've taken the view that it's an opportunity to collaborate with the BBC rather than to compete with them. I mean, I've had a long time to think about this, a lot of years of looking at where local TV has attempted to find different economic models. And it seems to me if the BBC is willing to put up £150,000 plus some, it's not just 150, there's some additional variable income, and you can then produce local news to a standard that the BBC would use some, not all of, the stories that you produce, because it's unlikely that they would use everything, but they will take in return for you producing news, then you can build a new form of news producer. Effectively approach it as an independent production company, say this is like a production contract for the news, and you do that. And then you build your TV channel around that newsroom. And the newsroom's not very big. You're talking about a fairly small one with partnering with, in our case, the Manchester Metropolitan University and Salford University, but specifically Manchester Met because they've got a very active digital program there. And you can effectively come up with a hybrid model whereby you produce some of it yourself and work with the higher education, community groups, independent producers to generate news that the BBC itself isn't going to carry at a regional level. So I think the news is a really exciting opportunity, but only if you approach it as a digital startup. I'd love to approach it on the kind of scale that we see in North America. And I've been to Toronto and I've visited City TV in Toronto, and I think it's a fantastic concept. And I like the idea of having lots of live vehicles out and all of that kind of thing. My worry is that when you come down to it, the ad revenues have to be pretty ambitious to do that, or you have to have a substantial amount of equity involvement behind you. And if you approach it as a digital startup, well, maybe it's a less substantial offering in the first instance, but if you work with the BBC, then the quality should be there, and hopefully you'll produce something that people in Manchester and elsewhere wouldn't see otherwise, because that's what it comes down to. It's a kind of news that you wouldn't see otherwise.
On that same point, if I can just... Channel M did that. Channel M was very successful. It was popular. People liked the content, and yet the Guardian Media Group decided that for whatever reasons it was, to quote, it was unable to it was commercially unviable service within the government strategy to provide local TV. So,
well, I mean, I stopped doing Channel M in 2004. In the first 7 years, I think it was, we were running it on a tiny shoestring. £150,000 a year, I think, is what we were spending. It was absolutely nothing that the Manchester Evening News was willing to invest in it. From 2004 onwards, it was ramped up on a City TV model. The consultants came over from Toronto and very ambitiously they went for it. The problem was they were ahead of their time. They were trying to do it on their own. There was no other local channels around the country. They couldn't get any traction with national advertising, so they're dependent entirely on local. It was being run out of a newspaper. My view is newspapers are the worst possible partners for local TV. They have a different agenda. So, they were spending a lot of money trying to do local TV in a way that was sub-regional and very expensive, and consequently it came a terrible cropper and the Guardian got out. That's it. They lost £15 million. It was a dreadful experiment, and unfortunately it's kind of blighted Manchester. If you ask people in Manchester, what do you think of Channel M or local TV, they said, not sure if we want it. Our research says, not sure if we want that again. So it's been a great disappointment in that respect.
There was just another couple of points. Is even though there's the news acquisition with the BBC, it doesn't preclude local television from actually trying to get other people to acquire their either news offering or actually other programming. And I think that hasn't been explored. And the other issue that we haven't even touched on, and I think we will when we all sit around the table, is talk about the national ad sales, right, which is what you need to.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where I was going to come in and say that where this initiative is so dramatically different from everything that's happened before is that although all of the licenses are local and about providing local content and television in the community, what you're actually creating here is a new national network or semi-national network on Channel 8 in a lot of the country. Now, that will attract a significant audience, and it means that for the first time, local broadcasters can coordinate and sell their media on a national basis. It also means that a lot of the other costs that you traditionally associate with broadcasting can effectively be shared, and a lot of those are being underwritten by the BBC grant. So the entire financial model of local television looks streets different from anything that we've seen before.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, rather than ask Debra, because it's an obvious thing to do, I've like the Canis media guys, what do we learn from abroad? There are countries on this planet which do local TV brilliantly. Have you spoken to them? Have you been there? Have you seen? You mentioned it. I mean, give us an idea of what they do well that we can do.
Yes, I mean, certainly. I mean, personally, I've looked obviously at City TV in Toronto, a lot of channels in the US, and we've done work in Africa, in Australia, and in other parts of Europe. And it's a lot of that experience that we're trying to bring to the table here. We've often had a difficulty here, which is that our local broadcasters have found it very difficult to tap into national revenues. And they're too small. If you have 21 new small stations all individually going and trying to talk to the large buying agencies in this country, nothing's going to substantially change. But when you start to aggregate those audiences and work together, at that point it becomes of interest to the buyers. We have a long-established relationship between the media buyers in this country and the large sellers and aggregators of media. And that's a very comfortable relationship, and it's existed for a very long time. To be a new player in that space, you either say we're going to rip up that whole system and change it, which is what a lot of people did 10 years ago, and sadly that didn't work, as it hasn't worked for a lot of smaller channels on Sky, for example. Or you say, no, we're going to be part of that system, and we do that by forming effectively a national sales network, although what it's made up of is small, independent, local stations creating their own content and reflecting their community needs.
Anybody else got any more funding points to make before I move on to the next?
Just one point, which is that when you have a local channel, you have a lot of airtime. And you can look at it two ways. You can think that's a lot of airtime for us to fill, or you can say that's a lot of airtime that's an opportunity for other people to fill. Yep. And where I've approached it here in Manchester and also in Liverpool, where I'm involved in an application, is to look at how groups who are not part of the broadcast, a bit like Channel 4, if you approach it as a publisher and say, well, look, here's the airtime. What's the cost of access to the airtime on a local channel? £150, for instance. If you said you can have an hour of airtime for £150, but you've got to go and produce the programs, well, that throws it back to local content providers to do it. Now, can people do it? Well, yeah, I think probably if you get the money at the right level and people are capable of generating content and finding sponsors or having it underwritten in other ways, or even just pay for through community groups, then you're going to generate quite a lot of interesting and very relevant material. So I think that's sort of a different way slightly of looking at it to the way Ed's looking at, where I quite agree, for some programming you're going to need common advertising sales, and equally a common research currency is a crucial thing that needs to be set in place. But once you've got those in place, you've still got a lot of airtime that you may as well use locally as fill up with, say, acquired programs that have come off somebody's back catalogue that's quite old or whatever.
Okay, let's move on. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty if we can. There's a commonly held perception that broadcasting and producing TV content is prohibitively expensive. To test this theory, we asked a selection of visitors to BVE North what they thought it would cost to set up a small broadcast operation for local TV. And hopefully this is what they said.
I think it'll cost around about
300k?
Anywhere between 200 and 800k.
Probably about cool million.
About 750,000.
£400,000 to put together a local TV station.
Those figures were way off the mark. There are systems out there that don't cost anywhere near those sort of figures and that can allow local TV operators to break even or even make a profit quite quickly. I'd quite like to illustrate that point if I can. Is Paddy Taylor available? Paddy, the setup we've got here today is effectively a local TV studio. We're broadcasting,
yep,
right?
pretty much.
What would it cost?
Well, the Autocue Production Suite in the kit here, in the rack's about 22,000. We've got sort of camera support from Vinton and other companies, Liebeck. We've got very high-end cameras actually from Ikegami, which are probably a bit more than you'd use for a local TV station. So things like the JVC camera and the Kinoflow lights, you could probably put all this together for around about £40,000.
That's quite a difference. I'd like to pry, if I can, into some of the panel's take on this. Now, I appreciate that none of you are technologists per se, but I'd like to know what sort of... Yeah, pen goes down. I'd like to get maybe Ed, as the latecomer to the panel gets the poison chalice. You're bidding for both. You're bidding for the multiplex operator contract as well. You must have an insight into the kind of technology that is required both to operate the network and to broadcast local TV. What's your take on it? What kind of things have you looked at? Do companies have legacy equipment? They're going to buy bespoke? Give me an idea.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, I think, two distinct phases, if you like, of a process that you need to think about and identify separately. You've got the content creation side, and the costs of creating content have plummeted, all in our kind of commercial working lifetimes. One piece of kit that Paddy was just talking about would have cost 22,000, and now you can get a whole suite of stuff. So stuff that you need to run your studio. So a gallery and media management systems. Those are all available for very low cost. But then what happens once you've made that content? And it's that where things get more confused and more complex. And what the multiplex operator will do is take that content and run it right the way through transmission, up onto the antenna and out. And that's something that needs to be coordinated on a national basis, not least because one transmitter can potentially interfere with another. You also have the management of all of the data that goes with the process. So, you press the buttons on your remote control and it tells you what's there. Well, the systems that you need to operate that, to insert that data into the Freeview broadcast streams, those are all quite complex systems, and they're things that have the potential to impact on the rest of the Freeview channels if they're not done properly. So there's quite a complex set of tasks. The BBC money was originally intended to focus specifically on that transmission side. But what we've done with our bid, and touch wood that we'll get good news before long, but what we've done with our bid is to extend the range of services that money can be used for further down the line towards things that I think many local licensees will have tried to fund in their business plans. And if we succeed, then actually BBC money can be used to take some of those costs out of local licensees' business plans.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know technology is not strengths of anybody's on the panel, but Phillip or Debra, Phillip, you've got the microphone. Is there any, in terms of what you've learned from Channel M or Carlisle TV, what sort of things do you need to look at from a production and broadcasting standpoint?
Well, I learned to strip back the costs from looking at the Channel M, which was configured with Omnian servers and Avid vehicles, branded vehicles, the whole thing, and good for them. It was done on a proper scale for a city TV channel. So I looked at it differently. I thought, well, what do I need? I need a server, and I need to partner with a studio. So I've partnered with universities, 2 universities here in Manchester. One, Salford, has a fantastic studio. It looks like a regional ITV studio, so you wouldn't need to build a studio on that scale. And the other university has a terrific digital facility. So the way I looked at it is, well, really, let's look at a play box or a TV in a box, an NMR, someone like that. What's the minimum level of server that I would need? How do I connect to you? That's an issue to be resolved. If I were to win the license, it would be an issue to resolve, because if you win your license, then you've got a particular technical plan. So there's a question there, but I come at it from the point of view is, what's the minimum equipment I can actually put in to sustain a credible service? And 40k for a studio, well, that's pretty good. Maybe trim it down a little bit. But if you could do the whole thing for under £100,000, which I think you can, well under £100,000 actually. Now you may say, a city like Manchester, is that all you're going to spend? But it's a digital startup. I'm not trying to be Granada TV or Northwest Tonight. I'm trying to be a digital startup. And if you approach it that way, then your ambitions are different. And Debra, I guess you take a slightly different perspective because you've come with a city TV model.
I have come with the model, but it's more of the ethos than the technology. And I think what's really important in the whole local TV debate, there's been 2 approaches. One are those companies that are bidding for more than one city, and they actually come with their own technology platform. They've already made decisions about X, Y, and Z and how they're going to operate. There's everybody else who really just wants to provide the content. And I've encouraged the likes of Phil and a lot of other single city bidders to actually not make an awful lot of decisions until we're all sitting around the table and see where we can develop the economies of scale, and to actually find out who wins a MUX call, what are their expectations going to be, what are their demands going to be, because there's no point in all of us building our own railroad tracks. At a certain point, I think that's a good example in the UK, but at a certain point you actually have to come together to make sure that we're sort of building the similar types of infrastructure just so that we can do that kind of sharing. So the economies of scale and working together is probably as important as what our own local objectives are.
Can I just, on that point, I think that, again, something that we identified early on when we were talking to potential bidders was the need to share content. And as a story, I actually wrote the story in our application, we were talking to a potential bidder for the Oxford licence, and we met them in a pub just after they'd been filming some content for their website. And they were filming a documentary about an airfield where there's somebody manufacturing 9 new Spitfires. So we were humming. I thought, A, that's a fascinating story. But secondly, well, that's a local story there because it's where they're being built. Of course, the Spitfire was originally built in Southampton. So you have a story there that is immediately of local interest to more than one area.
Yeah.
And so part of the backbone of what we're seeking to build is an infrastructure that will enable licensees to grant permissions, if they wish to, and share content between them. Because as Phil said, filling a schedule with that range of content to keep an audience throughout the day is going to be a challenge. But once you allow the licensees to easily share content with each other and, of course, potentially with the BBC, then I think, again, it has a significant impact on the model.
Claire, did you want to add anything there before I move on to the final questions?
No, I'd just say, I think when Jeremy Hunt launched this initiative to various opinions, one of the things that really was about collaboration. It was about working together. It was not about replicating ITV, but it was about taking truly local organisations who are passionate about their regions and helping them work together. It's not about, I think people have to calibrate their expectations about how much revenue they're going to make out of this. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, they need to calibrate their expectations with regard to the revenues they're going to make out of it. And I think the majority of those licenses that have been awarded to date are to organisations that are absolutely passionate about what it is that they're trying to do locally.
Fantastic. Right, to conclude, I'd just like to go to each of the panel and get them to succinctly as possible let me know whether or not they think genuinely local TV will be a success this time round. We'll start with Ed, if that's okay.
Some channels are going to be outstandingly successful and some will fail. And I don't think that we should judge the overall success of the initiative by those that don't work, because what we're going to see is extraordinary innovation. And I think that's exciting for the industry as a whole. So, yes, the succinct answer, I think that the local TV initiative will work. Shouldn't be judged by individual channels.
Fantastic. Philip?
I think the licenses that have been awarded across a number of different areas so far, and you can say different people are coming with different models, so it's difficult to say which ones will work. I think the one that is most likely to work is the one that takes a realistic understanding of what could be achieved in a local area rather than in a networked approach. I don't think the network approach is likely to work. I think it's too ambitious. So that, to my way of thinking, if you can do something which is realistic and which local people respond to, and you provide something that is different so that it isn't, replicating existing news, then those are the ones that will work this time round.
Debra?
I think it's, yes, I think it's going to be successful. Of course, I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't going to be successful. And I also want to please a lot of, investors and partners that are supporting us.
Yeah.
And we'll do everything, and it will be a commercial model. But I think more interestingly is the way we're going to innovate in terms of building the new relationships and the new partnerships. And I think that is really critical, keeping local and being successful. I want to brag about Birmingham.
Fantastic.
Big it up, Birmingham.
Claire, last but not means least.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic opportunity. I think that one of the key things here is that, and to back our Comux bid, we are going to provide everything for local broadcasters to just get on with what they do, which is making their programmes, engaging with their audiences, and not having to worry about the technical aspects of distribution or any of the other things that would normally cost so much money.
Fantastic. That's a fairly resounding yes. I'd say it's a rallying cry for all concerned with local TV. And on that very positive note, I think we'll leave it there. With a free view slot confirmed, significant funds being provided, exciting content ideas being devised, original business plans being drawn up, and the nation's thirst for localised television news remaining unquenched, the future looks bright for local TV. Let's hope it stays that way. Before we go, I'd just like to thank our speakers. Thank you for your time, and for you lot for watching here and on the internet. From the broadcast show live at BVE North, there's another show at 2 o'clock, but other than that, goodbye.